Hello and welcome to the Brothers of Dynasty podcast live stream edition. Guys, this is our first live stream ever.
Live.
You see our faces.
It just kind of cuts right in. It's really abrupt.
Yes, I told you. We went through this in rehearsal.
It was still jarring.
Anyways, for those who are regular listeners to the Brothers of Dynasty podcast, thanks for tuning in. If you are new to the show and have not listened before, we are the best fantasy football podcast hosted by three brothers from Rhode Island. There's a lot of competition of three pairs of brothers from Rhode Island hosting fantasy content, but we cream rises to the top, as they say. I'm your host, Josh Christensen, joined as always by my two brothers, Jay and Andrew. Jay, as we always start off the show, what are you drinking tonight?
I'm drinking Proclamation Brewing Company. This is from Rhode Island, and we're in a visual medium here, so I can actually hold.
You can show the cans that we usually show just to each other.
Yeah, it's just lovely green can. This is Tendril. It's an India Pale Ale. I don't know if you've heard of that beer before, and it's a 7% alcohol by volume, and it's delicious.
Thanks for giving one too many details that we did not need there. Andrew, what are you drinking tonight?
I was feeling Halloween basic, so I went with Wormtown's Fresh Patch. Real pumpkin-y. It's nice pumpkin harvest ale. But I would also like to say for the regular listeners that yesterday, when our recording didn't happen, I was drinking whiskey. The streak is still alive, so
we don't need to go into that.
Maybe before you tell us what you're drinking, Josh, tell us about what happened last night.
I don't know what you guys are talking about. Someone said he didn't press record when we started our podcast, so we decided to go live today instead of doing our regular podcast. But I think it's a happy accident. I'm glad we're doing this live as always. Remember, since we're doing it live, you can comment in YouTube in the chat box. We can see those. We can answer your questions. We can bring those up in the chat if you want to throughout the show. But what am I drinking, you ask? Well, it's an Aperol Spritz. Thought summer was done, but no, I'm keeping on summering here in New York and drinking an Aperol Spritz.
It's a fall drink too, I guess. You know, for our first live episode, you really had to break out the Aperol Spritz. I mean,
yeah, it's true. And I was craving it. When we did our dry run yesterday, is what we'll call it. I had red wine, feeling very fall-y, but that didn't work out. But we should move into the football. But before we do, we should mention that the Brothers of Dynasty is a part of the Fantasy Football Collective network of podcasts. You can find the Fantasy Football Collective at FF_collective. That's KOLLECTIV on Twitter for all sorts of great content and great podcasts like the Fantasy Nightcap, the Fantasy Boardroom, and Collective Knowledge. So be sure to check out all of those great shows and all of that great content. So today we are focusing on week 4, of course, in the NFL season. What else would we be talking about? And as we've done before for past shows, we will be doing a week 4 storyline mock draft. That will be 12 picks. We'll rotate through and we'll talk about what these fantasy storylines mean for the rest of the season and what they mean for your dynasty team going forward. So we're starting, Jay, with you with storyline pick 101.
All right, so since we already had a dress rehearsal for this, we should know what we're going to pick, but maybe we'll go off the board a little bit here. I don't know, but I'm going to stick with one I talked about last night. I mean, we have to start with the superstar of fantasy, Corduro Patterson, that we all predicted preseason. Like, got to get Patterson into your teams. I mean, this guy's going to be a star. Just get him. And he can play 2 positions. He's a running back and a wide receiver. And crazy, he is number 5 wide receiver on the year. And he's the 2nd overall running back, if he counts in that scoring system. Sleeper on, if you play on there, he counts as both running back and wide receiver. He's absolutely crushing it from that standpoint. But he's just a weird guy to deal with in fantasy right now. If you're a contender, if you're trying to win week to week here and win a championship in Dynasty, he's an interesting thing because can this last? Can he continue to produce the fantasy output that he has when you consider that this week he scored more points than he actually had snap share? He's on the field for 30% of the snaps and he scored 34.6 fantasy points in PPR. Over the last
Listen,
4 weeks,
don't knock efficiency, Jay. That's what we want.
This
right?
guy just gets out there, he gets the ball, he scores. It's crazy. He on the year he hasn't gone over 26 snaps. He had 24 week 1, 24 week 2, 26 week 3, 23 week 4. I mean, that's what you're going to get from Corduro Patterson. So it's just it's interesting because he's not even getting the target share either. He just gets out there. He happens to get it when he's on the field, but Ridley and Pitts get the majority of the targets. They just don't happen to be doing anything with him so far. He only had 13% target share this week. Yeah. So I think it's a simple, he's probably a sell in Dynasty or in fantasy because like, can he keep it up? But it's also a matter of like, what can you get for Patterson, especially if you're contending? It's like, is he better off a hold and ride this out, see how far the magic lasts, or what can you realistically upgrade to if you were looking to get a more stable option at running back or wide receiver for your team?
Yeah, I think if you're a contender, you just got to hold out on get as much of that sweet Cordero Patterson juice. I'm regretting saying that already. That you can as you go through.
Sweet juice.
But just to drive home the efficiency level that we've talked about, he has 45 touches on the season. That's 33, mind you, amongst wide receivers and running backs. It calculates out to 1.85 fantasy points per touch, which is like a solid half a point higher than guys like Alvin Kamara and Austin Eckler get
last
historically.
Year was 1.4 with his huge year RB1,
which is absurd. That's what makes Alvin Kamara. But Cordero Patterson's an 8-year pro. We know what Cordero Patterson is. He doesn't have the snap share. He's been super duper efficient, but that's gotta level off. But where that levels off to might still be relevant for you, given especially at the running back position. If he's coded there for you in your leagues, I think he's possibly could still be a valuable running back too down the road.
Yeah, I mean, we see the PPR backs being valuable right now. Anyways, Chase Edmonds is like the super stable, and he gets way more, snap share than Patterson. Yeah. But it's just a rock solid, he scores you 15 points every week. Patterson could slip into maybe a lesser version of that maybe that's his floor. Maybe and that's useful if you can play him at running back. I'd be a little bit worried if you were stuck with the setting where he's just wide receiver. He's a little bit more hard to slot into your lineup just because there's a lot of wide receiver options.
Yeah, absolutely. Although still wide receiver 5 on the season as we go.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Ring out every bit of juicy value that you can get out of him.
You could possibly have a wide receiver core of Cooper Kupp, Mike Williams, and Cordero Patterson. Yeah. Someone's rolling out that lineup each week.
Yeah, but if you're not competing or looking to use him for compete, I feel like he's a player that gave you zero value for years. If you can even get a second round pick or something like that out of him, I feel like in the dynasty game, you've netted value. Because he was going to be a guy that just went off into the sunset eventually. It's surprising if you've even kept him on your team to this point. But if you have, you can probably get a nice little trade piece out of it from someone that's a little desperate or looking for that piece to add depth, or maybe they got nothing. You never know. And maybe we get close to playoff time and he's still continuing to produce. Who knows? Maybe you could squeak out that late first. You never know. Crazier things have happened in leagues.
I mean, if you can get a first round pick for Cordero Patterson as a non-compete team, smash accept. I mean, you're never going to get more.
That's ever happened.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to our next storyline. Andrew at the 102.
All right. I love that I get a second shot at ripping on CEH. So I'm just going to give the commentary on his back-to-back 100-yard games. The reason I'm still not excited about him is because he's still a guy who's valued at that RB1 hopeful type of player. We still know the value that we invested in him in last year's draft and probably in startups this year. But he is a running back who has in 4 weeks yet to register a rushing touchdown, which is a problem. His usage in the red zone, especially within the 5, is non-existent this year, and we've actually seen more meaningful use go to Darrell Williams. Yeah, no,
yes, it's Darrell Williams.
A reason my point is only made by the fact that I had to think of his name like that. And then also on top of that, he's never had more than 3 targets in any of these games. I don't think he even got any targets in the first 2 games. So you're looking at the fact that he's still someone who is not getting the rushing work that we want to see. He's not getting the usage on the goal line, which would give him upside, and he's still not getting that receiving upside. I think it's more likely that the usage he's getting between the 20s is indicative of a high-powered offense that we know Kansas City is, and he's just profiting from it as he sort of chugs along, like, and works with that team. But ultimately, it's not indicative of him being a particularly special player. And if his upside is 17 points, or, you know, not being able to break 20 points, I just still don't see there being any returned hype for him. I don't see myself buying into him. And in a year that we've agreed is pretty weak for running backs so far, with all he's done, especially in these past 2 weeks, he still hasn't cracked. He's running back 21?
Yeah. After 2 weeks that people are toting, it's proof that he's reemerging. But what does that really translate to? I think it's more of a question about resetting expectations more than anything. He's not going to be an RB5. Probably not, unless something crazy happens.
Yeah. So until his value sort of comes down, like reverts to that mean, and maybe next year in your startup, like you can grab him as a closer to mid-round type player, get him as your running back 2 that you waited on, or even a running back 3. Maybe you feel fine about it, but the idea of him returning to that running back 1 value that we hoped he'd be, that guy just cleaning up in that big offense, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, and overall, his snap shares have actually declined from the course of week 1 till now. Over the course of those weeks, you've also seen Darrell Williams' snap share go up. So they're actually kind of almost splitting time, and it's almost helped. I don't know if that's helped his efficiency, you know, considering the fact that he's averaging more. He's kind of in the same area of touches overall, CH. But, you know, obviously he's gotten over 100 yards 2 weeks in a row, which is good. He's playable. It's just, I think it's like to Josh's point there, resetting expectations. I think that makes sense to me, because sometimes we have a tendency to want, like, every player we like has to be like top 6 at their position. And sometimes they're just, I don't know, more solid plays. Like, you're going to,
and I agree with that.
Most weeks, you might have to pay attention to matchups depending on your roster. Especially in Dynasty. Dynasty teams are just established different than redraft teams, where you could have a stacked lineup of running backs on your team, and you're going to have to maybe matchup play with CEH depending on what else you have.
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough for me to. I have 0 shares of CEH. 1, I didn't have a 101 or even a pick where I could take him in any of our rookie startups. But 2 is just a guy who I've never thought lived up to the value that he was being proclaimed at. But let's move on to our next pick, which is me at the 103. And I am going to... let's talk about Urban Meyer, guys.
All right.
So... If you've been living under a rock, you probably haven't heard about the Urban Meyer latest scandal, which honestly, in the line of scandals for Urban Meyer, is pretty tame. A video emerged of him at his restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, after that loss, going 0-4 with the Jaguars. For some reason, Urban Meyer was in Columbus, Ohio, not flying back with his team on the team plane, not with them in Jacksonville. Anyways, Urban Meyer ended up at his restaurant in Columbus, Ohio. And there's a video of a young woman dancing up on Urban Meyer in a, you know, it's weird. It's gross. It's not great for Urban Meyer. On the relative scale of things that could happen for people in sports across the nation, it's not the most scandalous thing, but it's just another in a line of credibility shaking things to happen to Urban Meyer. It started with bringing out Brian Doyle, the racist strength and conditioning coach from Iowa, who had been fired just 9 months prior, and that whole scandal that started off the Urban Meyer tenure in Jacksonville. Then there was the Tebow situation, which was just kind of weird overall. There was the fake QB battle with him splitting reps with Gardner Minshew and Trevor Lawrence in training camp, which, by the way, I think affected football. Well, yeah, Andrew, I know you're like, I'm going to make a serious football point here, but like Trevor Lawrence and that offense didn't seem ready for the season. And, you know, if you're splitting first team reps between a rookie quarterback who you drafted at the number one pick, who's Trevor Lawrence, we all know he's starting. Why are you taking valuable reps away from him? But that's something from a few months ago. This is the latest in the line a bit. And there was people have been calling for him to be fired all yesterday across the networks, making all the same points that I'm making. This isn't anything new. I'm regurgitating what's been out there. But the reality is that it's just, I want Urban Meyer to be fired so bad to bring it back to a fantasy purpose, because I think the longer Urban Meyer is in Jacksonville, the less fantasy upside there is in the short term for Trevor Lawrence. It's just, it hasn't gone well so far. That offense has gotten better in this last game, but seemed really out of sorts early on. I'm hoping he's gone sooner than later. And by sooner, I mean like this week. I would like him to be gone this week, so we could get a coach like Eric Bieniemy or Brian Daboll. Brian Daboll would be perfect because similar-ish skill sets between Lawrence and Josh Allen. I think that system could work really well between the arm talent and the ability to run that read option, which was a revelation for Trevor Lawrence in this last game. So from a fantasy perspective, I'm rooting for Urban Meyer to get fired. One, because I don't think he deserved the job in the first place. Thought it was a bad hire to begin with. Don't think he's a great guy. And it's just going to be better for Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence in the long term.
Yeah, I think people have been saying this, even like way preseason, when just weird stuff, even with like the weird ETN, catching all the passes, which was
yeah.
And it was like, it started there where like, what's he do? What's Urban doing? And it was always kind of this mistrust of like, what is Urban? He's not like, he's just, I think we talked about it on the show. Like, can he acclimate himself to the pro game just from a football standpoint? Or is it Urban's way or the high? Like, I don't know. It's just weird. It's been weird the whole time. And like, yes, for fantasy players on that team, I would like to see a different coach there.
Yeah, it just seemed like he didn't have interest in building an actual franchise, which is what you're taking on when you take a team like Jacksonville that had the first overall pick. It means they're the worst team. They're probably not good. You're not going to step in and form a playoff-bound team. Like, you're going to have to work towards it. And it just, I don't know that it ever seemed like that was something he was interested in doing. And now, 4 games in, 0-4, it seems like he could be someone who's looking for any way out. Like, I mean,
fine. I don't even care. Go to USC. Go anywhere. Just get out of the NFL.
Have him. Yeah.
Take him. Pac-12. Good luck with it. Fuck Urban Meyer. Boom. Moving on to the next storyline. Jay at the 104.
Well, let's bring it back around to something more positive here. Let's talk about Saquon Barkley a little bit. Saquon, who we had to go through a couple weeks of the season where it was, wasn't looking great. A mix of him and kind of that offense in general. Daniel Jones and just, in terms of not any good carries from Saquon. He's recovering from the knee injury. What are we going to do with him? Last 2 weeks, the guy's played tons of snaps, 87% of the snaps last 2 weeks. He's played 117 out of 134 snaps. He's gotten almost all of their running back touches, basically, have gone to him. And the best part has been the target share that Saquon's seen, which is something that's been missing for the last couple of years since his rookie season, when he caught around 80 balls that year. That's such a huge part. We know that's huge for running backs. You see Austin Eckler crushing it this year, Kamara's season last year. where guys don't even need to get over, 250 carries necessarily to just crush it in fantasy because they're catching so many passes. Saquon can do that. He's a very, very capable pass catcher. It was just missing for a while now. And now the last 2 weeks with 6 and 7 targets in those weeks, 13 overall, the touchdown this past week where he's open, he gets the ball in space, scores a long touchdown after a reception. That's what you want to see. Get Saquon into space. This is a dynamic player that's fast. He's basically a freight train when he gets the ball. We know how he's built. This is a guy, just find ways to get him the ball in good spots. It doesn't always have to be carries where he has to kind of dance and, get tackled for 4-yard losses. And, obviously he can pop those occasionally too, but man, just seeing him getting more targets is a huge thing for fantasy because he's going to step up back into the conversation of a guy that could, I don't know, maybe be a league winner this year. There's not that many. You got Derrick Henry so far away at the top.
30 points ahead of everybody else at what is a pretty rough start to the season for running backs.
And with the injuries going on, CMC's out for a few games. It's just like, this is prime for like, if you have Saquon on your team, you might be in the mix because he is a guy who can get that volume. And we're seeing it from how much he's playing. They're not this knee injury. I think we're beyond that. He's getting the snaps. He's getting the targets. He's getting the carries. So I'm really excited going forward. It's just whether that offense can kind of sustain it. That would be the only worry, is that offense is still going to be inconsistent, but Daniel Jones looked good this week too. So step in the right direction for Saquon, which I'm sure is exciting, especially if you have him in Dynasty and you're looking to contend this year.
Yeah, I will say I'm in NYC for those who don't know. I'm not a New York sports fan, but it was a notable weekend for New York sports fans because the Jets and Giants won in the same season, and actually the Yankees as well. They're playing right now.
Both in overtime too, right? The Giants.
They were. You rarely see it. You have not seen the Giants and the Jets win in the same week for a while, I would assume, because those teams don't win much to begin with. And also just like a quick, just to round out the Giants overall, like you said, Danny Dimes looked pretty good. Kadarius Toney showed up 6 for 78, something like that in the game. Nice to see
9
him.
Targets, I believe.
Yeah, something like that. He was a pretty nice addition.
Andrew's guy
there. Andrew
stealing my talking points.
We are going to spend less time on the New York Giants. Great weekend for them, but this is all we're going to talk about.
They're a 1-3 team, but Saquon's awesome. So
Saquon's great. Love to see Saquon back. One of the best pure talents in the league. And coming back from that ACL injury, it was going to be a slow build, but it looks like he's rounding the corner. Let's move to the 105. Andrew.
All right. Yeah, I just wanted to go with the general update on state of wide receivers and mostly talk about Tyreek Hill. Just kind of giving the example of how 1 week with some of these talented guys at the top can change everything for you. Obviously, with such a deep position like wide receiver, it can be tough to get like a true measure of where exactly these players are going to fall in the grand scheme of things. But 4 weeks in, you can already see how it doesn't take much for someone like Tyreek Hill to just bound to the top. Yeah, he had a couple of like slow weeks between week 1 and now, but in 1 week, he can just put up like the top fantasy performance of this entire year, putting up 11 receptions for 183 yards or something like that, 3 touchdowns. He's just a special player. And some of these guys at the top, like your Devontaes, your Tyreek Hills in the like.
Your Corduro Pattersons.
Yeah, of course, Cordero Patterson.
He goes with that
right in there with that. I mean, these names are inextricably linked, but these are the guys. They show what they can do for you, and you're gonna see that as other players maybe break out and fall off. These are the guys that are continue to rise to the top, and these are the guys that it proves to you are going to win you championships because of what they can do. And at any time, they can just break out for insane stat lines in fantasy performances. So not much more to say about someone who's a talent like Tyreek Hill or the other guy, but just it's sort of just a reminder that that's all it takes for him to jump into the 2 spot. And now he's 2 points away from being the number 1 to Cooper Kupp, who's been really consistent, but definitely bounded over Mike Williams, who we agree after a few weeks we like, but didn't have a great performance last year. And that's all it takes for him to sort of sit back a few spots. So it's, you sort of see how things sift out after a few weeks, and you can see the true guys.
This is really what happens. We always have these outliers at the beginning of a season. Now, I do think Mike Williams is more sustainable for other reasons.
And I mean that. I wasn't implying that.
No, exactly. But is Mike Williams going to finish as wide receiver 2 on the season? Most likely not. You're going to see Tyreek Hill move into there. You're going to see Devontae Adams move back up into that conversation. Stephon Diggs, Calvin Ridley's will move forward, because once you get the totality of the season, it tends to even out a little bit. Now, Cooper Kupp has been there before. This isn't really an outlier. Jay, we talked about this last week on the show, or 2 weeks ago, where Jay was talking about the value in that offense, and people were sleeping on Cooper Kupp, a guy who's been wide receiver 4, I think, was his peak in 2019, I want to say, a few years ago. Talented wide receiver. This really isn't a surprise there. Some of these other guys, like Corduro Patterson, as we've been talking about, will level back out, though that doesn't that they become irrelevant, a la Mike Williams as well. But let's move on to our next storyline, which is going to me, and I'm going to talk about the Dallas Cowboys. Everybody likes to talk about the Dallas Cowboys on there. Sorry, I could bring up a comment right here, because just, Mike, we're not talking about DJ Moore.
But he played against the Cowboys, so it's sort of relevant.
He did play against the Cowboys. They're not going to talk about it.
I talked about DJ Moore last night on the unrecorded version of the show.
Well, that's the lost episode. That's the lost episode that nobody will ever hear of. No, I want to talk about the Cowboys, specifically about, one, they're a lot better than we thought they were going to be, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And the defense isn't necessarily relevant for most fantasies, although you're getting a lot of takeaways if you play in a league that has team defenses. Certainly, Trayvon Diggs has been a steal in IDP, although that's not really our format that we talk about. But between Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs and some more marginal improvements amongst other defensive players, that is an average at worst defense right now, who is getting takeaways. Like, it's amazing what a difference having a pass rusher, versatile player like Micah Parsons and a lockdown corner can do for a team. The Cowboys are legit, and that's not great for the offensive's fantasy production, actually, at least from where I'm sitting right now. So some numbers to throw out there with Dak Prescott. Dak Prescott right now is QB 12 on the season. Certainly not bad. He's a lock-in starter in 1 QB formats, certainly in 2 QB formats. But we were talking about him possibly being the QB 1 this season because we thought that this would be a great offense. Check. Still a very good and productive offense. But they were going to have to air it out a lot more because the Cowboys defense was so bad. They're not that bad, so Dak hasn't had to throw it as much. He has under 30 attempts in 3 straight games since 58 attempts against Tampa Bay, although you can't run against them. And in the last game against Carolina, where they were ahead for most of the game, there were 30 rushing attempts between Zeke and Pollard in that game, and they were very good. So the rushing game's effective. The defense is performing better. Dak doesn't have to do as much as we thought he would be. He's still good. I still think Dak is a quality starter in this league. I think he's going to finish closer to 10 than he is to 1, though, in Dynasty this year. And that's not quite how you were drafting him, especially in redraft, and not what you were expecting out of him in your Dynasty formats as well. It's not bad. I think it's just a little bit of a digression from what we expected. And on top of that, I think that's particularly limiting the upside of the receiving cores. I don't know if Amari and CD have the same upside that they used to. I think they're still going to have their weeks separately and apart, but I don't think it's going to be a year where Amari and CD Lamb both finish as top 12 wide receivers. I'm just resetting expectations, as is the theme this tonight.
Yeah, it's the theme. Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. Yeah, it's tough when you have other players that maybe have a more advantageous situation to produce that type of QB1 overall type of numbers. Yeah. I agree. It's definitely not a question of him being a QB1, but I don't know, if you're kind of sitting up top and you've got that really great running game that you can lean on when you're higher up in game and your defense is keeping you there and you don't have to air it out. Yeah, you're going to get some of these games where he's throwing under 200 yards. Luckily, you hope that there's a few games where he still just turns it on regardless, because I mean, you got to imagine that teams like Kansas City could just say, I mean, they don't have the same game plan, but there's plenty of games that they've blown teams out and been like way up and shutting teams down. But like Mahomes can still gather those plays. But I don't know, they're definitely more of a throw first team. Like Dallas might have more of an even keel, still throw first, but a little more even approach.
Yeah, but as we just talked about with CEH, the running game isn't as much of a focus as it is in Dallas. It seems like, I mean, Zeke and Pollard, I think, are the best running back tandem in the league. Like, Zeke looks rejuvenated.
Hunt and Chubb probably won. They
I don't know. I really like Pollard. Kareem Hunt certainly has a more of a track record.
Line has been pretty fantastic, too.
They've been really, really good as well. It's it's an interesting, it's a different offense than we expected to see preseason.
Well, they're spreading it too, because the tight ends are really involved. Jarwin and Schultz both heavily involved, touchdowns there. So that's to the point of maybe Lamb and CD, both starters, just the expectations a little lower. It's going to be harder for them to creep up into that wide receiver one conversation with how stacked that position is when it's being spread out and they're not throwing 60 times a game, which was probably not realistic because you just never know with these defenses.
Yeah.
They get better.
It's tough. I don't know.
It's tough when you're rooting
around.
Yeah, it's tough when you're rooting for those guys like the Amaris and CDs, and you see people like the tight ends or Cedric Wilson pulling in touchdowns. It's like, come on.
Yeah, and they're going to have their weeks. They're going to have their weeks big time. And the thing with Dak is he was worth it, maybe a little lower than maybe where you drafted him, but still, you're drafting for safety too. When you draft a guy that high, you're never expecting Sam Darnold to be QB5. That's not when you're drafting.
No, and I think Danny Jones is QB7, 6. I mean,
you're getting jumped by some guys that just are kind of at this point of the season, and we might expect them to regress a little bit back to where they might. Should end up, but you never know. But you're drafting for upside and safety. Like I know, like Mahomes to me was always like the 101. He's the perfect example because it's like, yeah, his range of outcomes is like QB1 or QB3. Like, so like, I think I'm just going to take him, even though he might end up as QB3. So Dak kind of provides, like you're pretty stable with Dak as your quarterback. So he's still a fine pick for your QB.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the 107, Jay.
Oh, this is my pick here. We're going to stick with quarterback, kind of. You were talking about Dak there with the Cowboys. Let me jump over to Baker Mayfield. So Baker Mayfield, obviously that team's doing well. The Browns on the season, they're 3-1, doing well. But Baker Mayfield finds himself as QB 25 for the season. So on the opposite ends of the spectrum of the guys that we were talking about before. And the problems lies a little bit with him, but a lot with how that team operates. This is a team that they're at the top of the league in rush attempts. We just talked about the tandem that they have at running back. They have Kareem Hunt. They have Nick Chubb. So they're one of the best rushing teams in the league, and they're the 6th lowest in pass attempts. It's just not passing very often. He actually had his most pass attempts this past weekend versus a defense I thought that they were going to really, really score on because everybody else was. So the Vikings defense didn't look so hot. He completed under 50% of his passes versus them. Not very good. And, had one of his worst fantasy weeks of the year. Just
a pause on that. That was possibly the worst game I've ever seen this year. That was so ugly.
I thought it was going to be a better game especially for fantasy purposes. It was not. It was far from it.
Jesus Christ.
I thought we agreed that all the Raiders games are the worst to watch.
They are pretty bad too. Like even last night was just a weird. I don't know. They're always just disjointed. But anyways, like get back to Baker. He's an interesting guy. He probably is the biggest difference between NFL quarterback to a degree and fantasy. Like he could get into that game manager role where they're doing play action, they lean on the run, and he can win. And on the flip side of it, you're not getting fantasy, value from that. You're not. On the year.
We're having some technical difficulty with Jay, but we'll get him back up in a second. No. Yeah, just to continue his point, though, with Baker Mayfield, they have 11 total team touchdowns. Only 3 of them Baker's responsible for, 2 throwing, 1 running. So it's not going great for Baker Mayfield in terms of what he's providing to that offense. He really is in that game manager role. He really is just kind of keeping the offense going along while this running game really takes off. And the running game's terrific. Like, so the offense is doing pretty well. They're averaging 25 points a game. They are, converting touchdowns. They are winning games. That's what they're doing. So it's not like anything needs to be fixed, which is probably the most damning thing for Baker Mayfield in terms of they don't need him to do anything more than he's doing.
Yeah, they mostly need him to just be that very basic game manager. They've got other people that can kind of carry things over the goal line. Like you've got 2 great.
Literally.
We were talking about how great Pollard and Elliott were, but it goes without saying that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are an almost equally great, if not better, running back tandem.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, we got Jay. We got you back.
Get off the internet upstairs. What are you doing?
Let's move on to our next storyline at the 108. Andrew.
Oh, man, I'm still just going to talk about Kadarius Toney, but let's see if I can keep it.
No, we're not talking about Kadarius Toney.
6 for 78. What a nice opportunity for Toney. Well, I mean, we can only talk about because also he is the guy that I kind of picked as my rookie bust, but still got a long way to go to meet that first round cachet, but I don't know, pretty good opportunity for him. I know that Slayton and Shepard were inactive for this game, so he was going to have to step in, but I don't know if he can continue to produce in a meaningful way, whether there's inactives or not. That goes a long way for him sort of retaining or regaining some of that value that he lost with some of his bad training camp performance. So that's it.
Yeah, nobody had
Anyone have any more thoughts on the Giants?
Oh, no, we're not talking about the Giants. What a waste of a pick for Andrew to go back to Kadarius Toney.
I was that sure about it.
Let's.
He led the league he led the team in targets. He led
the league in targets.
He was the Corduro Patterson of his team.
Yeah, more or less. That's where he came down. And let's move on to the next storyline. That's enough Kadarius Toney for the day. Let's talk some Dynasty Buys. Why don't we? We'll break a little bit of the storyline, but we're at the quarter-ish mark. Used to be the quarter mark. Now there's 17 games, and we don't actually know the quarter mark is going to be.
What's the fraction come out to in decimal?
Well, it's going to be after the first quarter of the games. It doesn't make sense if we break it out. Sometime around 3:00 on Sunday will be the 1 quarter mark.
4.25.
Yeah, 4.25. I know decimals. Those are coming out fine. Anyways, but let's talk about some Dynasty Buys. And I've got 5 buys I want to throw out there for you, and they're for different reasons. A few of them are for contenders, which would be, notably, it's really hard to get performing running backs in Dynasty to make a push, or at cost running backs that aren't going to like cost you an arm and a leg, like a Dalvin Cook, like a really high performing player. But James Robinson fits that bill. Had his best week to date this past week, 2 touchdowns, 18 carries, not being used quite as much in the passing game, but he was effective, and he's running back 7 on the season so far. But he has a clock on him with Travis Etienne coming back next year, which makes him the perfect buy for a contender because you can get him at a fairly discounted price of what an RB1 would be. So love James Robinson there. In another situation, a little more of a depth piece, Chase Edmonds. Really like him as a buy right now. He has double-digit fantasy points in PPR every single week and 4 catches every game. And that Arizona offense looks like the best offense in the league right now. So love him. And then some deeper some buys for rebuilding teams. Tua is injured right now. I know it hasn't looked pretty so far, but I still think you're never going to get him at a lower value than he is right now. Like Van Jefferson, Andrew's guy from last year, talent's good, like the offense, had 6 targets this past week, is a deep threat. Really love that. And finally, Kenny Gainwell, who I think we all liked the talent this past year, but this past game, when they went to hurry up for Philadelphia, it wasn't Miles Sanders on the field. It was Kenny Gainwell, and he came through. They were trusting him in big moments. So I like the skill, particularly in a PPR format. I think Kenny Gainwell could be a Nyheim Hines-like contributor for you in fantasy going forward. Didn't expect it this soon, but I think his buy window is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. So get in on Kenny Gainwell now, because I think he's going to be a valuable piece going forward. Not an RB1, but a valuable piece. Any other buys you guys want to throw out there?
I'll throw out one. Darrell Henderson, similar kind of to the James Robinson, where the window is probably small to a degree, but the talent seems to be there, and he's getting all the work there on a good offense. 14 of 17 RB carries this past week, 90% of the snap share there. He even gets targets, had 6. So I think he's a solid buy for someone who, if he's on a non-contender in Dynasty, I'm pretty sure they'd be willing to move him.
I think that in my take almost changes a little bit updated after last night, but I think Mike Williams is an interesting upper echelon type buy. Yeah, he's in those top wide receiver ones right now, but I have to think that he's still a guy that you can maybe purchase for first, like late first. Maybe you got to give a little bit on top of that, and then maybe after last night's shaky performance, you could get even a little bit more of a discount, because that recency bias on a guy who's only just breaking out and doesn't have like enough behind this season for someone to be like truly, going nuts about. Like, 1 week isn't going to sink someone like a Tyreek Hill or a Devontae Adams, those guys that have just proven track records. But Mike Williams, it can. So I sort of like him as a guy that you can buy, and if you've got to give a first to get him, I think that you could still profit off of that, and that's a relatively reasonable amount to give for a guy who could be a big playoff piece.
Just to bring in our comments here from Full Tilt Dynasty Pod with Tommy over there, Ayuk and Visca. I like those buys as well.
After the injury to Chark, Visca could be
Adam
a really
Cole,
interesting buy.
Yeah, I like Visca preseason. I liked him even with Chark. I think as that offense got better, I thought he was going to be good. But with Chark going down with that fractured ankle, it's going to be a lot of Visca and a lot of Marvin Jones going forward.
Do you think you can buy Ayuk low? Do you think people have probably bought into that enough? Like, disappeared again? Like, I would think you could probably buy him low, but you trust him for region like that this year? It's a little dicey, but he's probably worth it if you can get him for the right price.
Yeah, that's always the thing with these players who seem like they're truly in the basement. Is if you're like putting myself in the position, I don't have any shares of Ayuk. I don't think so. But if I did own Ayuk, I'd probably be holding, just because he's so low right now. There's no way I'm going to recoup any value. Well, what are you going to really? You drafted him in the second. you could obviously, I don't think anyone's offering more than a second. Maybe I don't know if you're going to get a first for Ayuk. I don't know if what you're really going to get. Maybe it's Ayuk for, I don't even know. That's always a tough one and a tricky one. You're probably going to have to push a little bit and give someone more value. You're going to have to like play the game a little bit. Someone's going to have Ayuk and be like, oh, I'm going to get no more than a second for him, and actually come in with something that's closer to what his value would have been preseason, but still at a good value for you. It's a tricky
find that happy medium.
Yeah, to thread that needle, I think, is pretty tight with Brandon Ayuk, just because he's been so bad so far this season. Let's move on to our next pick at the what are we at? 110? Yeah, the 110, Jay.
The 110. Let me jump over to some of the receivers that are getting good stat. I'll talk about DJ Moore a little bit because I just think it's interesting who's actually getting target share on different teams throughout the season so far. This was an interesting tweet. This came from, I guess, John Daigle. So it was one that jumped out to me. The players who've registered 20% target share in every game played through week 4. The list is not very long. It's Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, DJ Moore, Ridley, Thielen, Metcalf, Debo, Brandon Cooks, Jacoby Myers, Deontay Johnson is the other one there, and he's just only through 3 because he obviously missed a week. And I just find it's interesting that now DJ Moore, who wasn't necessarily a target monster before, we didn't really think of him in that way. This is a guy who could do a lot with the touches he was getting him. We covered him in the offseason where we liked him because of his yak ability. It's a guy that gets the ball, and he'll catch it downfield, and he will also produce after the catch. Now he's getting numerous targets a game in an offense that seems to be clicking now with Sam Darnold there. So he's just interesting to be listed amongst some of those names of guys like Deontay Johnson or Stephon Diggs or Cooper Kupp. And that's a dangerous thing. And I think he kind of jumps himself back up into an argument in Dynasty where he's a wide receiver 1 that you can kind of build around. And he's still super young. So he is a very interesting guy. There's some interesting guys there too, just like Jacoby Myers. His target share is probably a little bit based on like the talent level on the Patriots, but it's an interesting guy who just gets all those targets, doesn't score any touchdowns.
It's interesting. Listen, that's always the frustrating thing with Jacoby Myers. I think he's really talented, and it's interesting. I thought the game plan, and we don't. There's not much fantasy to talk about with the Brady return game. It was, a weird game for anyone who grew up watching the New England Patriots and rooting for Tom Brady. But Mack Jones, I thought the offensive game plan finally clicked into place for him, where they rolled out a lot of stuff that you saw him do at Alabama. Like, there were a number of routes that Jacoby Myers ran that he connected on where you're like, I've seen Mack Jones throw that to Devontae Smith. At Alabama, like per verbatim. So it's like finally it felt like Mack Jones was set up with an offensive game plan that worked for him, these 5 to 10 yard chunk plays, and Jacoby Myers was part of that, playing that A receiver role for Mack Jones. Was I breaking up for you guys?
Yeah.
Sweet.
Well, anyways,
we're running great tonight. It's really, really, really.
Yeah, we're killing it.
Things
so far.
are going fantastic.
The moral of the story was Jacoby Myers. He's pretty good. I like Jacoby Myers.
He almost threw a touchdown. That's the funny part. He almost before he even caught one, he almost threw a touchdown.
He had 45 yards passing.
Yeah, it's not bad. Do that more.
No, not bad at all. Anyways, continue with your point, Jay.
That was my point. Yeah, it was just basically DJ Moore. It jumps him back into upper echelon guys, and Jacoby Myers. That was just an interesting guy to be on that list. That was, because we just look at those guys and some of the best guys in fantasy right now from the wide receivers position. I just like DJ Moore jumping back into that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the next pick, 111, Andrew.
All right, let's just keep talking wide receivers. And I don't think I got a chance to talk about him yesterday, but another one of the guys that we really like, and I think maybe one or two of us picked as like the most improved candidate, Terry McLaurin. And I guess specifically talking are the touchdowns sustainable? He's got 3 touchdowns on the year. He just came off of his best performance of the year in this last game, I guess, with 123 yards and 2 touchdowns. Great game for him. I think he is by far the most talented, and this isn't a hot take at all. He's by far the most talented receiver and player on that Redskins team. I think they design a lot of plays for him. They look to target him. You can tell it by, I know game 1 and 3 weren't quite as great for him, getting 4 and 7 targets. I'm going to chalk up game 1 there as, Fitzpatrick went down. Also, Fitzpatrick was a big part of our initial projections for him, but luckily Taylor Heinicke, using his first name. Heinicke has actually stepped in and been pretty good to at least maintain his fantasy value. So luckily that hasn't been a huge fall off. But we've seen that in games 2 and 4, he's pulled in 14 and 13 targets respectively. He commands a large target share. They look for him in the red zone, and I don't see why he isn't going to be on pace for that sort of 100+ targets, double-digit touchdown type of performance on the year. He's, after 2 really good weeks and 2 sort of median weeks, he sits at, like I said, wide receiver 7, and I expect him to continue to perform at that level. So I don't see regression.
Yeah, I love Terry McLaurin. I think he's a rock star. He's had some like bananas catches so far this year. I think
the eye test makes it even better. We can talk about the stat, but he's just an impressive player.
But it seems like that offense is at least moving the ball. Like the Taylor Heinicke experience is very Fitzpatrick-like in a lot of ways. You know what I mean?
Feels like it, yeah.
He will throw the ball. He is not afraid to sling the ball, which is great for the value of a guy like Terry McLaurin. And also, on top of that, this defense, which we talked about being possibly very good, has been terrible. It's the most, I don't know what happened. I don't know if there's like a Freaky Friday situation between Dallas and Washington defense where all of a sudden Montez Sweat and Chase Young ended up in the bodies of, Leighton Vander Esch and Trayvon Diggs.
Just a lot of brain swapping.
Micah Parsons.
They've switched the brains to the defense, and they put Ryan Fitzpatrick's brain, his Ivy League brain, into Taylor Heinicke. It's just a bunch of science experiments
he chucked
going on.
Like that one McLaurin touchdown, just basically chucked it up. So he's not afraid. And that Ricky Seals-Jones touchdown, which I can't believe we didn't bring up Ricky Seals-Jones on the show, whenever that happened, last week. Just blast from the past.
RSJ.
They say that when Heinicke threw up that touchdown, he grew a full beard.
Man, he's not afraid to just hero ball it.
And Andy Dalton style beard, the glow up that Andy Dalton has had. How have we not talked about this? Guy needs some neck tattoos, and Andy Dalton looks like a badass.
It's a very, very, grows a great beard.
Great beard.
Should have done it for maybe.
I don't know why he didn't do it before.
Maybe he can now. I don't know.
He's like, yeah, I've used some hymns on my face, and it works great. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Let's move on to our final storyline of the day. And oh my gosh, so much to choose from. I'm going to talk about TJ Hawkinson. He was someone that we talked about preseason, possibly being a target monster, which came through in the first 2 weeks of the season. He had 20 targets in weeks 1 and 2 combined. He had 54.3 fantasy points in tight end premium leagues. he was an absolute beast. We saw that there was, he was the best option in that offense. He was the guy that they were going to, and that Detroit team seemed frisky, not good, but frisky in those first 2 weeks. That has not happened in weeks 3 and 4. He had 10 targets combined the last 2 weeks. He had 14.2 tight end premium point fantasy points the past 2 weeks. And he hasn't been the same guy. And it's really, I feel like it's kind of the curse of being the best player on a bad team. Like, it's pretty predictable what the Lions are going to do in the passing game. It's going to go through TJ Hawkinson and not really anybody else. So TJ Hawkinson's really fallen off. So question for you guys for the rest of the season, what are you expecting out of TJ Hawkinson? Does he kind of regain closer to week 1 and 2 and become that, one of those very few difference maker tight ends, or does he kind of stay where he was last year?
Yeah, I think it'll be somewhere in between, which is generally my answer with most. It usually
riding the fence.
Jesus Christ.
Which is boring for fantasy. You either have to be like, he's the greatest ever, or he sucks and he's a bum. Like,
these last 2 weeks don't mean shit.
Yeah, like, that's nothing. It was the first, but he's going to have some weeks close to the first 2 weeks, and he's going to have some of these because they, like you said, he's the best player and best offensive player on a team that's not very good and doesn't have a lot of skill position players. DeAndre Swift's really talented, but he's a running back. Different scenario. They don't have someone to offset him like a Tyreek Hill offsets a Travis Kelce, where I think that really, really helps him. The thing with Hawkinson is I think if you key on him, I think you're able to kind of stay with him a little bit. He's still going to be a top end tight end because tight ends aren't very, they're not very deep. They don't go very far. So he's going to sit a little bit closer to, I think, the Andrews area than he is to like the Kelce area, which is totally fine. He's still going to be very, very playable, a really good, player for your dynasty team or your redraft team. But if you could key in on him, he's not quite like the wide receiver tight end. And all they have to throw to at the wide receiver position is like Khalif Raymond. And they started to do that this week. I mean, that guy had touchdowns and lots of targets. So maybe if defenses do that, you're going to see them spread the ball around a little bit more, which is going to kind of cap him a little bit. But he'll still have good weeks. So, like I said.
Yeah, he will. I'm going to bring this back up, and it's basically to paraphrase, Waller has not been good, which is true. But this is the thing, I think, ultimately, with wherever TJ Hawkinson falls in terms of he may finish the season as tight end too. It may really just be Travis Kelce and then everybody else. Kittle hasn't been that good either. But I think it's less about when I talk about being a difference maker at the tight end position, I feel like it's more like the gap between tight end 7 and tight end 3 or 4. If Waller and Kittle and Hawkinson are really just kind of in that mix with Andrews, and they're really not that big of an upgrade over Logan Thomas, over Dallas Goedert or people like that, I feel like then that they're not going to lose you weeks, but they're not going to win you weeks the way that Travis Kelce has, the way Waller has, the way Kittle has in the past. Like, we were expecting it to be such an upgrade to go to these tight ends versus the rest of the pack that it just doesn't seem like that gap's really there anymore. And that's kind of where even if Hawkinson finishes as tight end 2, but the gap between tight end 2 and tight end 9 is 30 points. That's not the same as like Travis Kelce last year, who was like 50 points over tight end 2 and 100 points over everybody else. It was something ridiculous like that.
Hawkinson was still high last year. It wasn't like he wasn't a top end guy still. It's just sort of it's not a worry. It's still too small sample sizes to get 2 games and 2 games. The only worry would be if defenses have game planned. The last 2 have been the time where he hasn't been quite as involved. So it's just a question of how that offense goes into week to week and how the defense plays them and whether that opens things up for Hawkinson and whether he can establish himself, which is going to establish himself as that valuable fantasy asset more, at the upper echelon that you want to see.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the worrisome thing is that when you have the reports that the best receiver on that team is TJ Hawkinson, teams are going to key in on him. And as was already discussed, if there's no other talented player that's stepping up to truly offset him, it's going to really be hard for him to be a consistent producer. And I guess that's what we always see with tight end is the consistency is a really tough thing. It's really
no
rare
one seems to do it.
that can do it week in, week out. And maybe that's the best we can expect out of Hawkinson is that half the time he's going to have these really breakout games. And maybe that's still the difference between him and the lesser tight ends is that his highs are that much higher and his lows maybe aren't so abysmal. If his lows could be more closer to 10, especially if you're playing in tight end premium, you like to think that they can pull out 4 for 40 for you and at least get you a 10-point bump in your score. But it's always that consistency. And I don't know if we'll ever see that, especially on a team where there's just not enough talent to offset him. So that it's a rare thing right now on Kansas City or historically on other teams like a Saints with Jimmy Graham or the Patriots when Gronk was at the top of his game. And, he, even though they weren't the top, but he had people like Edelman that were just great possession or slot receivers to really set him up, and him and Brady obviously to this day just have that great receiver quarterback connection. So it feels like a really hard thing to replicate on a consistent basis. And I don't know if we can expect that from Hawkinson until they pull in a better lineup there.
Yeah, well, that's a good place to end the Hawkinson talk. Let's round out some honorable mention storylines for the day. Some injury notes that we should mention. David Montgomery, not a torn ACL, it's a sprained knee, but he will be likely missing 4 or 5 weeks this season. Yeah, it's not great, but it's better than an ACL tear. David Montgomery off to a really good start this season, following up on his games last year. Joe Mixon has a low-grade ankle sprain. He will most likely be missing a week, but should be back pretty soon. But we all remember that foot injury last year that went from minor to he never came back. So no clue what's happening there. Some other honorable mentions that are
Mixon.
Yeah, Ghost. That was so weird last year when he was just.
T. Higgins has done it this. T. Higgins, got hurt.
Is that another foot injury?
2 games. No, it was a shoulder, I believe.
It was a shoulder. Okay.
But it was just one that was low key, and then it's he's casually missing multiple games. It's fine.
I don't know. T. Higgins. Hopefully he gets back pretty soon.
Yeah,
although that offense seems pretty good.
We'll see.
That'll be good to see. Another upside note, all the rookie QBs seem to take a good step forward. From Lawrence on Thursday night, Wilson did not look like a quarterback for 3 weeks and actually performed pretty well against the Titans. Justin Fields was solid in his day, and Trey Lance it's a bit of an incomplete grade because he came in relief. The game, it was, that's always a weird situation. The only one probably we're not counting on is Davis Mills, who was absolutely dreadful in that game against the Bills. Ooh, 4 interceptions. Otherwise, everything's going all well. Yeah, love to see that. Mack Jones, as we mentioned a little bit earlier, had a nice game. So you love to see that. We love this quarterback class. I think particularly those top 5 guys, I think they're all going to be long-term starters in this league. And I do believe a couple of them, namely Lawrence and Fields, will be week in and week out QB1s sooner than later. Other honorable mentions that you guys want to throw out, storylines that we didn't touch on just quick hitters?
Yeah, or any teams actually good? It seems like every NFL team can beat every other.
I don't know, Jay. I think the NFC West is just going to cannibalize itself. Although it seems like the Rams and the Cardinals are the class of that division. Tampa Bay looks vulnerable. That secondary is really beat up. They got exploited.
Yeah.
Kansas City's defense is terrible. Honestly, if you had to gun to my head, best team in the league right now, the Bills. I think it's 118 to 21. They've outscored teams the past 3 games. They've just been bludgeoning people, including 2 shutouts. That defense looks like it's clicking. Josh Allen looks like he's in MVP form again. My money's on the Bills right now. Other than that,
this week that'll be a good one.
That'll be a good test. The Chiefs, I just think their defense is garbage, and then after that,
it's supposed to be better too. I mean, I'm not that keyed into, but
it's just I don't know. It's just I know they really went out and tried to fix their offensive line, and the Chiefs are still good. Like if you're still like anytime you have Patrick Mahomes, but it looks more like a situation like back in the day when you had like Peyton Manning and the Colts and some of those Brady years where it just seemed like, oh, our offenses are terrific, but can our defenses stop a nosebleed? That seems like the mode that the Kansas City Chiefs are in right now, and it's really dangerous to play with because sometimes when you get into the playoffs, things just don't go your way on offense, and then your defense can't hold up. Other than that, I like the Cowboys. I like the Packers. I love the Chargers. I'm kind of all in on the Chargers. Other than that, I don't know if there's many teams that I think are good.
Well, being another runner-up, are the Chargers for real?
Yes.
We agree they are.
I love Justin Herbert. I think Derwin James and Asante Samuel Jr. and Joey Bosa on that defense are legit. And Justin Herbert's the truth, man. I just love Justin Herbert. I think he's an absolute stud.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All in on the chart. Yep. Favorite quarterback probably in the league, Justin Herbert.
Love watching him. He's so fun to watch. It's incredible. I think that's just
we didn't mention Sam Darnold. We kind of did.
Oh yeah, we did talk. I forgot about
rushing superstar. That's all you have to say. Just gotta link.
That's it.
Lamar
5 rushing touchdowns.
another quarterback out from under the grasp of Adam Gase, looking like he's succeeding.
Real.
Get that guy away from anyone who works around a football or with a football. Or in any sport, just don't let him near athletes. I think that's
get away from it. Get away from me, Adam Gase. I think that's a good place to end it, though, for the night. We'll undoubtedly have more storylines next week, so remember to tune in to the Brothers of Dynasty podcast. We'll replay that on that feed as well. Remember to subscribe to it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Also, remember to follow us on social media at Bros of Dynasty on Twitter. Subscribe to our Facebook page, Brothers of Dynasty. Ask us questions, tweet at us. We'll try to bring things up. If something strikes you during next week's games, we'll try to get it on the show. If you talk about it, I kind of liked doing this live show, so maybe we'll do more of these live shows throughout the year, but you'll certainly be able to find us on the podcast. I'm your host, Josh Christensen. You can find me at DFFJChris on Twitter. And thank you, as always, to my 2 brothers for joining me. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks, Josh. This was fun live, but despite internet issues or whatever the hell was going on, you can find me at JAYC_DFF. And I don't know where I cut out on my Baker take, but it was basically saying that Baker's terrible for fantasy, if you missed that. And just drop them from your teams.
In 1 QB formats. And thank you, Andrew.
All formats, yes.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, John. You can also find me at Drewcy_music on Twitter, Instagram, and then any of the music that you would normally hear on the podcast all comes from my band Ghost in the Snow. Find our stuff at ghostinthesnow.com. That'll lead to all the socials and to Spotify, Bandcamp, and anywhere you want to stream music from. And I think we were able to pick up on that Baker take and just carried over the goal line like the rest of his team.
Thank you.
Finish it.
Thank you.
Like he doesn't do. Anyways, that's it for tonight. Thanks so much for tuning in. Tell your friends about this podcast and remember to set your lineups. Thanks so much. Have a good night. Bye.